Chapter 4. The next morning, Georgie and I made ourselves comfortable in our favorite tree, and I began reading Lassie Come Home to him. Nero climbed to a high branch and stretched himself along its length like a panther, surveying his kingdom. He dozed lightly, as cats do, swinging his tail from time to time to show he was keeping an eye on us. The first thing I noticed about Lisa's book was that the pictures were exactly the same as I remembered. There was Lassie, sitting at the gate, waiting for her boy, Joe. And the words were the same, too. Everyone in Greenall Bridge knew Sam Cartledge's Lassie, I read. In fact, you might say that she was the best-known dog in the village, and for 3 reasons. I leaned against the tree's rough bark and smiled at Georgie. Isn't that a great beginning? Go on, Georgie said. What happens next? What are the 3 reasons? I read the first 3 chapters. I meant to stop after 1 to make the book last longer, but Georgie insisted I keep going. Like me, he was furious when Sam Carlog sold Lassie, and even more furious when the dog was mistreated by Hines, the evil kennel man. He finally agreed to let me stop for the day when it seemed Lassie was about to escape from the kennel and meet Joe at school as she always did. Now Joe will get to keep Lassie, Georgie said with confidence. The Duke will see that Lassie loves Joe too much to take her away from him, and he'll fire Hines. Of course, Georgie was wrong. It wouldn't be much of a story if everyone got to be happy right away. I hid Lisa's book in a special hole in the tree trunk where we kept our things. The TV remote, plus a jackknife and a ball of string we'd also borrowed from Mr. Potter, and a cigarette lighter and a flashlight we borrowed from Mr. Alessandro. I suppose that sounds bad, but they were all things we thought we might need someday. It wasn't as if we had a choice. What are people to do if they have no money? With Nero at our heels, as faithful as a dog, we made our way through the fields and woods to the trailer. Even Georgie couldn't stay away. Lisa was sitting on the steps. Macduff lay by her side, panting in the fall heat. Mr. Morrison was inside, riding. Every now and then I heard him swear. Georgie giggled at the language the man chose to express himself, but Lisa paid no attention to her father. I guess she was used to his way of talking. Georgie poked my side. Do you think Mr. Morrison puts words like that in his book? I hope not. I could borrow a few pages, Georgie offered, and you could read them to me. I shook my head impatiently. It's a book for adults, I said, and probably boring, even with cussing in it. Georgie caught a grasshopper, something practice had made him good at, and then let it go. Lisa writes too, he said, in a little book. Her diary, probably, I guessed. I bet she writes about us, the spies and thieves in the woods, Georgie said. Wouldn't you love to read what she thinks of us? It would be easy to borrow it. Even though I would have loved to know Lisa's thoughts, I shook my head. Diaries are secret books. You put your deepest thoughts and most private feelings in them, things you don't want anyone else to know. I glanced at Lisa. The sun shone on her dark hair. I used to have a diary, but I filled it up a long time ago. It had a lock, I told Georgie. I kept the key on a chain around my neck. That flimsy lock didn't stop me. Georgie edged away, ready to run. I know all about Stephen Jenkins and the dimple in his chin and how he asked you to be his girlfriend, and you let him kiss you at the 6th grade picnic. Forgetting about Lisa, I jumped up to chase Georgie. But he was gone like a flash. The 2 of us made so much noise Lisa got to her feet and started across her yard at the woods. Thieves, she called. You better bring my stuff back. My father called the police and they're after you. Macduff ran toward our hiding place, with Lisa right behind him, as mad as any girl I've ever seen. Georgie had already disappeared, but I wasn't fast enough. I pressed myself against a tree trunk, hoping the sunlight and shadows would camouflage me. She'd called me a thief. Me, a thief. Didn't she know the difference between stealing and borrowing? Just when I was sure Macduff would find me, Nero came to my rescue. Making a loud rustling sound, he leapt out of the bushes right under Macduff's nose. The dog forgot about me and ran after Nero. In a few bounds, the cat scrambled up a tree, well out of Macduff's reach. He arched his back and hissed at the dog. "Macduff! Macduff!" Lisa tugged at the dog's collar, trying to pull him away from the tree. She was so close I could smell the shampoo she used, as sweet as honeysuckle. If it hadn't been for Nero, she would have seen me. Mr. Morrison opened the door and stuck his head out. "What's all that commotion?" he yelled. "Has Macduff treed a raccoon or something?" "It's a big black cat," Lisa cried. "He's way up high in the tree. What if he can't get down?" Mr. Morrison crossed the yard and grabbed Macduff's collar. "Sit. Be quiet." Macduff sat as commanded and stopped barking. Mr. Morrison peered up at Nero. The cat lashed his tail and growled. With his fur puffed up, he looked twice as big as normal, almost the size of a panther. "It's a feral cat," Mr. Morrison said. "It can take care of itself." "He's not feral," Lisa insisted. "He belongs to someone. I can tell. See how nice and shiny his coat is?" "Mr. Maloney told me Mrs. Willis had dozens of cats," her dad said. "After she died, they ran off into the woods and went wild. I imagine there are hundreds of them out there." "Can't you get 'em down, Dad?" "With my luck, I'd fall out of the tree and break my neck." He patted Lisa's arm. "I'll take Macduff inside. Don't worry. When the cat sees it's safe, he'll come down." Lisa watched her father walk away with the dog. Then she looked up at Nero. "I used to have a black cat just like you, but he died last year. He was very old." Nero began edging backward along the tree limb. Slowly he inched down the trunk. His claws made a scratching sound on the rough bark. "Good boy," Lisa crooned as he descended. "Good boy." When Nero was low enough, Lisa lifted him from the tree and cuddled him in her arms. "Would you like to be my cat? I'll keep you safe from Macduff," she promised. "You can sleep on my bed at night. I'll feed you cream and sardines, and I'll call you Aladdin like my old cat." Nero gazed at Lisa as if he were considering her offer. I felt a twinge of jealousy. Suppose he decided to belong to Lisa? No more mice and shrews and moles, no more cold nights in the shed. But no, in a flash Nero jumped out of Lisa's arms, stretching his slender body with each bound. He ran past my hiding place as if he had urgent matters to attend to. It might be a mouse hiding under a leaf, or a squirrel twitching its tail on a tree trunk, a blue jay calling from a bramble bush. Away he went, ever alert, ever curious. "Aladdin! Aladdin!" Lisa called. "Come back! Kitty, kitty, kitty!" For a moment I thought she was going to follow Nero and find me, but instead she stood where she was and watched the spot in the woods where Nero had vanished, her face sad. I guess she'd hoped he'd come back. But that didn't happen. She sighed and returned to the steps. She picked up her notebook and her pen and began to write. Before long, Mr. Morrison came to the door with Macduff. "Do me a favor, Lisa. Take Macduff for a walk. He needs some exercise." Lisa laid her diary on the step and set off across the yard. Macduff bounded ahead, sniffing and searching the way dogs do. "Where's she going?" I spun around to face Georgie. Don't ever sneak up on me like that again. You scare me half to death." "Sorry." Georgie's little smirk told me he wasn't one bit sorry. "Let's follow her," I suggested, "and find out." As usual, Georgie and I stayed in the deep shadows near the edge of the woods. Lisa and Macduff walked in the sunlight. The dog ran in circles around the girl, sniffing the weeds, the bushes, the trees. Hundreds of grasshoppers leapt out of his way, but he didn't seem to be interested in them. Trailing behind her dog, Lisa walked slowly toward Miss Lillian's house, just where she'd been told not to go. She must be a rule breaker, I thought. I glanced at Georgie. Maybe I'd break a few rules myself. At the front steps, Lisa stopped and stared up at the double doors, secured with a rusty chain and padlock. Georgie gripped my arm. "She's too close," he whispered. "What if she—" "We have to stop her." I took a step toward the house, but Georgie tightened his hold on me. "No, you can't let her see you." "But she might be in danger." "We can't do anything," Georgie insisted. "Besides, Lisa's not the one she wants." Reluctantly, I stepped back into the shade, unseen, unheard. Lisa was new to Oak Hill Manor. She knew nothing of the danger lurking behind those locked doors and boarded windows. Instead of climbing the rotting steps, Lisa stood on the grass, her face wistful, and gazed at the house. She was still too close, much closer than I dared go. Could she hear anything stirring behind the walls? "Oh, Macduff," Lisa said, "think how grand it must have been once. Can't you see guests arriving for parties, all dressed in fine clothes? They'd pull up right here in horse-drawn carriages. Inside the house there'd be sparkling crystal chandeliers, dozens of candles, platters of delicious food, a band playing a waltz. Ladies and gentlemen would have danced all night long, twirling round and round till dawn." Lisa held out her arms and spun, as if dancing to music only she could hear. Macduff cocked his head and watched. Georgie snickered, and I grabbed his arm as if I meant to pinch him. "Hush, she'll hear you," I whispered. After a few seconds, Lisa dropped her arms and curtsied as if she were thanking an invisible partner for the dance. Then, with Macduff bounding ahead, she walked around the house. Georgie and I followed, as silent as an extra pair of shadows. At the rear, she climbed the shallow steps leading to the wide brick terrace that ran the length of the house. She sat on a stone bench supported by two crouching lions, their faces streaked with dark stains like tears. It used to be my special seat, my throne. I hadn't even allowed Georgie to sit there. "She's on your bench," Georgie whispered. "Don't you care?" I shook my head. Seeing Lisa in my favorite place made me feel closer to her, as if she were truly my friend, and I was sharing something important with her. Georgie sighed and went to work on his mosquito bites. I slapped his hand. "Don't scratch, you'll make them worse." He pulled away. "I'll scratch if I want to. What does it matter anyway?" I shrugged. Do what you like. I'm sick of arguing with you." I put some space between us and watched Macduff run back and forth on the lawn, sniffing and wagging his tail. A pair of mourning doves hunted for food near a shaggy boxwood hedge, cooing to each other in their soft, melancholy voices. Somewhere in the woods, a crow called and another answered. In the fields, insects buzzed and chirped. High in the treetops, the wind sighed in the leaves, blowing a few off. They spun through the air and twirled to the ground, landing with a dry rustle. Lisa sat on the bench, as still as the stone cherubs, perched on the terrace steps. She seemed to be watching the clouds, just as I had when I sat on that bench. Georgie shifted his weight and sighed. "She never does anything but moon around, just like you." "If you're so bored, go away and do something else. I don't care." "If I leave, how do I know you won't go over there and start talking to her?" I stuck out my tongue. "You'll just have to trust me, won't you?" Georgie made a worse face, but he wasn't sure what to do. "Go or stay. Trust me or doubt me." "Promise me you won't talk to her," he said at last. I crossed my fingers behind my back and promised. "I'll be back soon," he warned me. In a moment he was gone, swallowed by the woods as if he were more deer than boy. Left to myself, I continued to watch Lisa. Macduff had wandered off, and she was alone on the terrace. I wished I knew what she was thinking. After a while, she walked to the top of the brick steps and looked directly at the tree that hid me. "I know you're there," she said. "Who are you? What do you want?" I glanced behind me, thinking Georgie might be hiding nearby to see what I'd do. I heard nothing but a squirrel chattering on a branch and saw nothing but a crow winging from one tree to the next. "Come out," Lisa shouted. "Let me see your stupid, stealing face." Tense as a deer at the edge of the woods, I stared at Lisa. Did anyone really care if she saw me? Would they even know? Maybe it was time to test the rules. I drew in my breath as if I were standing on a high dive and took a tentative step toward her. Still in the dense shade, still hidden, still safe. Lisa remained where she was, her eyes fixed on my hiding place, hands on hips, legs braced. She waited for me to show herself. Macduff was at the far end of the lawn, sniffing at something in a pile of old logs, his back to the house, unaware of my presence. I took another small step. The vines screening me shifted and rustled. Cautiously, I stepped into the sunlight and squinted across the ruined lawn at Lisa. Scared as I was, I raised my hand to wave and forced myself to smile. Instead of returning my smile, Lisa gasped and stepped backward, almost falling over the lion bench. Without taking her eyes off me, she cried, "Macduff! Macduff!" I froze, too shocked to move or speak. Lisa was afraid of me? What was wrong with her? Wasn't I a girl like herself? Why should she be scared? I longed to run to her and tell her I meant no harm. Surely she'd understand. She must be lonely. Like me, she must want a friend. But I didn't dare approach her now, not with her looking at me as if I were a monster. Again, she called the dog, louder this time, her voice shrill and shaky with fear, her eyes fixed on me. Macduff heard Lisa this time. He started to run to her, but when he saw me, he swerved across the field in my direction, barking fiercely. In desperation, I turned and fled into the woods, stumbling over roots and stones, crying as I hadn't cried for years.